Coming up on This Week in Trek, we get you more bang for your buck with Enterprise, take a look back at Insurrection, and talk about the Nostalgia Critic's own reviews of the Star Trek movies. All this and more on TWIT. Alright, let's blitz through the Enterprise playlist right now. Actually, I recorded a separate video with my fellow nerd of a feather, Jarrett Sullivan, that you can access by clicking anywhere here on the screen. And that will take you to our very long discussion about episode by episode of Enterprise, which one should be skipped and which one should be saved. I warn you, it's about 2.5 hours long, and it's also not edited, but go for it. It's basically just two nerds having a good time talking and catching up. So that's that for Enterprise. We've talked about it enough, so if you want to go see it, check that out. Next up, we want to talk about Star Trek Insurrection, the third movie in the Star Trek Next Gen series. This is a film that is widely criticized for being essentially a larger episode of Star Trek. And I would have to agree with that. In fact, it's not just that it's like an episode of Star Trek, it's specifically very similar to episodes that we've seen, just with a longer running time, better special effects, and not as good a writing team working on it. The plot deals with the forced relocation of a group of essentially space hippies who have set up shop on a planet that has prevented them from aging. And the Federation wishes to move them away because they need to utilize the radiation special property for medicine. And Picard and the crew don't like this because even though they've stood by forced relocation for the safety of the people before, in this case they've decided that it's a bad thing. Probably because these aliens look like white humans. It is definitely the worst of the Next Gen movies. There's some good jokes in there, it's funny, but the production values don't quite match up to the story. The plot in it just isn't up to scale for a larger movie. Whereas Nemesis was a draft that should have been rewritten, but still like had good ideas and good stuff going on and very cinematic appeal. And Generations was at least a passing of the torch, both for us seeing the captains handing off their legacy, as well as the Enterprise D being destroyed, setting up the Enterprise E for First Contact. Insurrection is just a weak attempt at having just an episode of Star Trek. And it doesn't even really make sense. The biggest problem with it, if you start getting into the Trekkier lore, is that this is taking place in the Dominion War. None of that should be happening. Like, this kind of mission should not be going on in the face of the Dominion War. I would rather them have tried to figure out a way to get the Enterprise totally away from the Federation for this one, if it was going to be something like that. Because it doesn't make sense, is sort of the big problem with it. You wouldn't have your flag warship doing God knows what. I don't even, or research on a primitive people when you're in the middle of a giant war. It's so much part of an earlier era of Trek, but then it's kind of funny to see Riker shave his beard in this one. The trope called growing a beard actually is derived from Star Trek The Next Generation, where when Riker grew his beard, the plots of the seasons became much more mature. And you could see that this is a more immature handling of a social issue that they did in fact tackle later in the series run. But in this case, they've made a less mature argument and are just ramping it up with special effects to get past that giant flaw. Ultimately, Insurrection is the weakest of the next-gen movies. Slightly weaker than Generations, not quite as good or cinematic as Nemesis, and nowhere near as good as the high watermark, which is First Contact. Insurrection is a forgettable and short movie that really was just an episode of the series. As we continue, we'll get to worse movies in the franchise, but fortunately next week we'll be going into First Contact, which is a stronger one, and I'm looking forward to it. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the Nostalgia Critic. for people who are familiar with the internet, they should know who the Nostalgia Critic is at this point. Doug Walker over at Channel Awesome has been doing tongue-in-cheek reviews of old franchises for years now, and in fact was one of my inspirations for getting these reviews started. He and Linkar are two guys who have always really liked the reviews, and a couple of years ago, Doug actually did a series of reviews of the odd-numbered Star Trek movies, the ones that are more notoriously bad. The franchise has always had the rule that the evens are good, odds are bad. And so he did a breakdown looking at each of the odd-numbered movies. And it was kind of nice to see. He brought in a lot of other guests. Specifically for Insurrection, he actually had Linkara. And it's a good track of episodes right there. I realize when I've plugged websites in the past, I probably should have actually listed their the links both in the bottom, but also actually shown the links here. So you should check out thatguywiththeglasses.com, which is where you can find Doug's and a lot of other people's reviews of Star Trek material. Doug and all of his guests do a good job poking fun at the various problems with all the Star Trek odd-numbered movies. So by all means, you should go check it out. Alright guys, next week we'll be taking a look at the first season of the animated series, as well as First Contact. Until then, I will see you guys later. Have a good one.